Nobleman's daughter secretly trained by Lumberjack to be a cowgirl. What she does shocks everyone. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will warm your hearts, about a brave little girl who dared to dream big on the wild plains of Montana. If you enjoy this story, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's begin. The morning sun painted the Montana sky crimson as a tea-rolled Eleanor. Whitmore pressed her face against the cold window of Whitmore Manor. Below, wild horses thundered across the valley, their manes flowing like liquid silk in the wind. Her small hands trembled with excitement as she watched them dance across the prairie, free and untamed. "Someday," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass, "I'll ride like that." The massive oak door behind her creaked open. Eleanor Elizabeth Whitmore. Her mother's voice cut through the morning stillness. "Step away from that window, this instant. A lady does not gawk like a common ranch hand." Margaret Whitmore swept into the room, her black morning dress rustling against the polished floor. 2 years had passed since Charles Whitmore's death, yet she still dressed as if the funeral were yesterday. "But Mama, look at them." Ellie's green eyes sparkled with unbridled joy. "The mustangs are back. Old Pete says they only come through twice a year." "And Old Pete fills your head with nonsense," Margaret interrupted, pulling her daughter away from the window. "You're the daughter of Charles Whitmore. God rest his soul. You have responsibilities, a reputation to uphold." She straightened Ellie's collar with practiced efficiency. "Now, Mrs. Henderson will be here shortly for your piano lessons." Ellie's shoulders slumped. "I hate piano. My fingers don't work right on those stupid keys." "Language, Eleanor." Margaret's tone brooked no argument. "A proper lady masters the piano, speaks French, and knows her needlework." The word cowboy tumbled from her mother's lips like a curse. Ellie bit her tongue, knowing better than to argue when her mother used that tone. But as Margaret bustled about preparing for the day's lessons, Ellie stole one last glance at the window. The horses were gone, but their hoof prints remained in the dusty earth, calling to something wild in her heart. That afternoon, while Mrs. Henderson droned on about proper finger placement, stories of cowboys who could ride anything with 4 legs, who lived under the stars and answered to no one but the wind. Her fingers stumbled over the keys, producing a discordant sound that made Mrs. Henderson wince. "Really, Mrs. Whitmore," the elderly teacher sighed during their break. "Perhaps Eleanor needs more discipline. Her mind is clearly elsewhere." Margaret's jaw tightened. "My daughter will learn, Mrs. Henderson. The Whitmores have never failed at anything." But Ellie wasn't listening. Through the parlor window, she spotted a lone figure at the edge of the forest. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wielding an axe with practiced ease. Each swing sent wood chips flying, and even from this distance, she could see the power in his movements. He paused, wiping his brow, and for a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice snapped her back to reality. "If you cannot pay attention, perhaps we should extend today's lesson by an hour." "No." Ellie's response came too quick, too desperate. Both women stared at her. I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson. I'll concentrate." But concentration proved impossible. As her fingers mechanically moved across the keys, Ellie's mind painted pictures of freedom, of racing across the prairie on horseback. Wind in her hair, no corsets or piano lessons, or proper lady rules to cage her spirit. She didn't know then that the stranger with the axe would be the key to unlocking that cage. She didn't know that Jake Sullivan had arrived in Willow Creek with secrets of his own, or that his presence would change everything for the Whitmore women. All she knew was that something had shifted in her small world, like the first crack in winter ice before the spring thaw. That night, as Ellie lay in her feather bed, she heard them again, the wild horses, calling to each other in the darkness. She crept to her window and peered out at the moonlit valley. There, moving like shadows against the silver grass, the herd grazed peacefully. And there, sitting on a fallen log at the forest's edge, was the stranger. He watched the horses with the same longing she felt, the same recognition of something untamed and beautiful. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up at her window. Even in the darkness, she could see him smile before he melted back into the trees. Ellie's heart raced. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow, she would find a way to sneak down to the stables. Tomorrow, she would take the first step toward her dream. She didn't yet know that tomorrow would begin an adventure that would scandalize dawn broke cold and gray over Willow Creek, matching Margaret Whitmore's mood as she reviewed the household accounts. 2 years of managing the estate alone had taken its toll, though she'd never admit it aloud. The numbers swam before her eyes. Feed costs, staff wages, property taxes. Charles had always handled these matters. A soft knock interrupted her calculations. "Come in," she called, expecting Martha, the housekeeper. Instead, Thomas Bradley, the estate foreman, entered with his hat in his hands. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Whitmore, but we got a problem with the north fence. Storm last week took down near 100 yards of it." Margaret's stomach tightened. "How much to repair it?" "That's the thing, ma'am. Our regular carpenter's laid up with a broken leg. He's been clearing land for the millers, and they say he's right handy with more than just an axe." She remembered seeing a stranger yesterday, working at the forest's edge. "Is he reliable?" "Can't say for certain, but the millers speak well of him. Says he's quiet, keeps to himself, but does honest work." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Thing is, we need that fence fixed before the cattle start wandering." "Very well. Send him to speak with me this afternoon." Margaret returned to her ledgers, but concentration proved elusive. Another decision, another stranger to evaluate, another reminder that she was alone in this vast, unforgiving territory. Meanwhile, Ellie had risen before her governess, creeping through the sleeping house like a ghost. She'd hidden riding clothes, boys' clothes pilfered from the laundry behind the garden shed weeks ago. Now, heart pounding, she changed quickly and made her way to the stables. Old Pete was already there, mucking out stalls. His weathered face crinkled into a grin when he saw her. Well, if it ain't Miss Ellie, dressed like a proper ranch hand." "Please, Pete," she whispered urgently. "You won't tell Mama." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your PA used to sneak down here too when he was a boy, for his father beat the wildness out of him." He gestured to a stall. "Buttercup's gentle enough. But if your mama finds out, she won't." Ellie's determination rang clear. "I just need to try, Pete. Just once." The old man saddled Buttercup, all the while muttering about losing his position. But Ellie saw the understanding in his eyes. He knew what it meant to love horses, to need them like air. As Ellie led Buttercup out the back way, away from the house's windows, she felt alive for the first time in months. The mare responded to her touch, and soon they were trotting along the tree line, hidden from view. That's when she saw him again, the stranger, working on a fallen oak. His axe rose and fell in steady rhythm, each strike precise and powerful. He'd removed his jacket despite the cool morning, and his shirt clung to his broad back with perspiration. Buttercup nicked softly, and the man turned. His eyes blue as a summer sky, widened slightly at the sight of her. "Well now," Jake Sullivan said, his voice carrying a hint of Texas drawl, "aren't you a bit young to be riding alone?" Ellie straightened in the saddle, trying to look taller. "I'm 8 years old, and I can ride just fine, thank you." A smile tugged at his lips. "I can see that. You sit a horse well for someone your size." He set down his axe, approaching slowly so as not to spook Buttercup. "Name's Jake Sullivan." His expression shifted slightly. "Whitmore. From the big house." She nodded, suddenly wary. Would he tell her mother? "Your secret's safe with me, Miss Eleanor," he said, reading her fear. "Though you might want to work on your posture. You're leaning forward too much. Makes it harder to control the horse if she spooks." "Show me." The words escaped before she could stop them. Jake glanced toward the manor, then back at her eager face. "Your mama know you're out here?" "No," Ellie admitted. "She thinks ladies shouldn't ride. She thinks," her voice caught, "she thinks I should just play piano and learn French and marry some boring old man when I grow up." "And what do you think?" "I think," Ellie took a deep breath. "I think I want to ride in the rodeo. I want to be the best rider in all of Montana, better than any cowboy." Instead of laughing, Jake nodded seriously. "That's a big dream for a little girl. I'm not that little." He held up his hands in surrender. "My apologies, Miss Eleanor. Tell you what, you get back to that big house before someone misses you, and maybe next time you sneak out, I could show you a thing or two about proper riding." Her face lit up. Really, but only if you promise to be careful, and if we get caught, we won't." Ellie was already turning Buttercup around. "Tomorrow, same time." Jake found himself nodding despite his better judgment. There was something about this fierce little girl that reminded him of. He pushed the memory away. Tomorrow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parlor as Margaret Whitmore sat rigidly in her high-backed chair, waiting for the carpenter Thomas had mentioned. She'd changed into her most severe black dress, the one that made her look like a woman not to be trifled with. A firm knock echoed through the foyer. Martha showed in a tall man who seemed to fill the doorway. Margaret's breath caught slightly, not from attraction, she told herself firmly, but from surprise. She'd expected someone older, rougher. Jake Sullivan was certainly rough around the edges, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. Mrs. Whitmore. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. Tom Bradley said, "Your fence work needs doing." "Yes." She gestured to a chair, but he remained standing. "Our north boundary requires immediate attention." "What are your rates, Mr. Sullivan?" He named a fair price lower than she'd expected. "Actually, that include materials." "Yes, ma'am. I know where to get good timber cheap." His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-weathered face, met hers directly. "I can start tomorrow, if that suits." That would be acceptable. She found herself studying his hands, scarred from work but clean nails trimmed. A working man who took pride in himself. "Where are you from, Mr. Sullivan?" "Your accent suggests somewhere south." A shadow crossed his features. "Here and there." "Texas. Most recently." He shifted slightly. "If you don't mind my asking, ma'am, will you be wanting just the fence repaired, or the whole boundary checked?" "Noticed some weak spots riding in." "You're observant." She appreciated that. "What would you recommend?" "Full inspection, be wise. Winter's coming, and Montana storms don't forgive weak fences." He paused. "Course, that's more time and money." Margaret calculated quickly. The expense would strain the budget, but losing cattle would be worse. "Do what needs doing, Mr. Sullivan. I trust you'll be fair in your assessment." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being trusted. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do right by you." An awkward silence fell. Margaret found herself noticing irrelevant details. The way his chambray shirt stretched across his shoulders. How he held his hat carefully to avoid crushing the brim. "Will there be anything else, Mrs. Whitmore?" She startled slightly. "No, thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Martha will show you out." But at the door, he turned back. "Ma'am, saw your girl out riding this morning. She's got natural talent." Margaret's spine stiffened. Eleanor was riding. Alone. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Wasn't alone. Old Pete was with her. The lie came smooth as honey. "Just thought you should know, she's got real promise. Be ashamed to waste it." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Margaret strangely unsettled. She'd have to speak with Pete about taking Eleanor out without permission. Though when was the last time she'd seen her daughter smile the way Charles used to when he talked about horses? That evening at dinner, Ellie could barely contain her excitement. She pushed food around her plate, lost in daydreams of tomorrow's secret lesson. "Eleanor, stop playing with your food." Margaret's voice cut through her reverie. "Yes, Mama." Ellie took a dutiful bite of pot roast. "Mama, did you know the Johnson's daughter rides in exhibitions? She won a ribbon at the county fair last year." "The Johnson's daughter is not a Whitmore." Margaret's tone was final. "We have different standards. But Papa used to ride. Your father is dead." The words came out harsher than intended. Margaret immediately softened her voice. "What he did, or didn't do, is no longer relevant. You must think of your future, Eleanor. No respectable man wants a wife who acts like a ranch hand." Ellie stared at her plate, appetite gone. "Maybe I don't want a respectable man. Maybe I don't want any man at all." "Don't be ridiculous. Every woman needs a husband." Margaret set down her fork. "Eleanor, I know these years without your father have been difficult. But we must maintain our position in society." It's what he would have wanted. But Ellie remembered different things about her father. Stolen moments when he'd lift her onto his horse, promising that someday he'd teach her to ride properly. Promises broken by a heart that gave out too soon. Later, as Ellie prepared for bed, she heard something outside. Peering through her window, she saw Jake Sullivan's silhouette near the stables, talking with old Pete. Their conversation looked serious, and Pete kept gesturing toward the house. Then Jake reached into his pocket and handed Pete something. Money, Ellie couldn't tell. But Pete nodded and shook Jake's hand before heading to his quarters. Jake remained, staring up at the big house. For a moment, Ellie thought he looked sad, the same expression her mother wore when she thought no one was watching. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Under her pillow, Ellie had hidden a bird's feather. She'd found a tail feather from a red-tailed hawk. She clutched it now, making a wish on it like old Pete had taught her. "Please," she whispered to the darkness. "Please, let me learn to ride like the wind." She didn't know that Jake Sullivan was making his own wishes in the small room he rented. In town, didn't know he saw his dead sister in her determination, or that teaching her would open wounds he'd thought long healed. The pre-dawn air bit sharp as Ellie crept from the house, her breath forming small clouds in the October cold. She'd barely slept, too excited about her first real lesson. The stable was warm with the heat of horses, and she found Jake already there, checking Buttercup's hooves. "You're early," he said without looking up. "Good, real riders don't sleep." He straightened, studying her borrowed clothes critically. "Those'll do for now, but you'll need proper boots. Can't control a horse right in those soft things." Ellie looked down at her delicate shoes, already muddy from the walk. "Mama would never buy me riding boots." "Then we'll have to be creative." Jake led Buttercup to the small corral behind the stables, hidden from the house by a grove of cottonwoods. "First lesson, forget everything them fancy riding instructors taught you. Side saddles for showing off, not for real riding. But Mama says, your mama ain't here." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You want to ride like a cowboy, you learn to ride like one. That means astride, balanced, part of the horse instead of perched on top like a decoration." For the next hour, Jake transformed everything Ellie thought she knew about horses. He taught her to mount from both sides, to grip with her knees instead of clutching the reins, to read Buttercup's moods through the mare's ears and breathing. "Feel that?" he asked, his hand over hers on the reins. "When she shifts her weight, like that, she's about to turn. You gotta anticipate, move with her instead of against her." His touch was gentle, patient, so different from her mother's sharp corrections. When he smiled at her progress, it reached his eyes in a way that made her feel proud and capable, instead of constantly lacking. "You're a natural," he said as she completed a smooth figure eight. "Got your daddy's seat, from what Pete tells me. You knew my father." Jake's expression closed off slightly. "Heard stories. Man liked his horses, even if he couldn't always show it." He glanced at the lightening sky. "Better get you back before the house wakes up." As they walked Buttercup back, Ellie gathered courage. "Mr. Jake, why are you helping me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally, had a sister once. Emma. She was about your age when—" He cleared his throat. "She wanted to ride more than anything. Our PA said no, said it wasn't fitting. Then she got sick, and..." He stopped walking, staring at something beyond the horizon. "Sometimes I think if I'd just taught her anyway, given her that joy while I could." The pain in his voice made Ellie's chest tight. Without thinking, she slipped her small hand into his calloused one. "I'm sorry about Emma." Jake looked down at her, surprised. Then he squeezed her hand gently. "You remind me of her. Same fire, same stubbornness." He managed a smile. "Same talent for trouble, I'm betting." They reached the stable to find old Pete waiting, his expression grave. "Mrs. Whitmore's looking for the young missus. Says she's got a visitor coming for breakfast." Ellie's heart sank. "Visitor?" Pete nodded. "That banker fellow from Billings. Clarence Worthington." Jake frowned. "The one trying to buy up half the valley." "Same one." Pete helped Ellie down from Buttercup. "Better hurry. Miss Martha's covering for you. Says you're feeling poorly. But that won't hold long." As Ellie ran for the house, she heard Jake ask, quietly, "Worthington been coming around much?" "Too much," Pete replied. "Got his eyes on more than land, if you catch my meaning." Through her bedroom window 5 minutes later, having changed in record time, Ellie watched Jake working on the north fence. His movements were sharp, aggressive, like he was angry at the wood. She didn't understand why Mr. Worthington's visit would upset him, but she was about to learn. Clarence Worthington III was everything Ellie despised about her mother's world. He sat in their parlor like he owned it, his soft white hands folded over a substantial belly, oily hair pomaded to perfection. He'd brought gifts, French perfume for her mother, a china doll for her. "Eleanor," her mother prompted when Ellie failed to respond appropriately. "What do you say to Mr. Worthington?" "Thank you," Ellie mumbled, holding the doll like it might bite. She hated dolls. "She's shy," Margaret apologized. Since her father, natural for a young lady to be reserved. Worthington's smile reminded Ellie of a snake. "Perhaps she'd like to see the new pony I've bought. Gentle as a lamb, perfect for a refined young lady." "I don't want a pony," Ellie said clearly. "I want to ride real horses." "Eleanor." Margaret's cheeks flushed. "I'm sure Mama would love to see it." Ellie stood abruptly. "May I be excused?" Without waiting for permission, she fled. From the upstairs landing, she could hear Worthington's oily voice. "Spirited little thing. Needs a firm hand, perhaps." "She misses her father," Margaret replied. "It's been difficult. Which is why you need a man's guidance, my dear Margaret, for both your sakes." There was a pause. "I've been patient, but my offer won't stand forever. The estate, your hand. It's a generous proposal. Ellie's blood ran cold. This wasn't about ponies or dolls. Worthington wanted their home, their land, wanted her mother. The very thought made her sick. 3 weeks passed in a dance of secrets and stolen moments. Each dawn, Ellie met Jake at the stables, and each lesson revealed new worlds. She learned to read the weather in the horse's behavior, to communicate through shifts of weight and breath, to trust her instincts over rules. But the lessons were more than riding. As Jake worked on the fences, he shared stories of the open range, of cattle drives under endless stars, of wild horses that ran free in hidden valleys. His words painted pictures that made Ellie's confined world seem smaller than ever. See that mustang stallion? Jake pointed to a distant ridge where a lone horse stood silhouetted against the morning sky. He's been watching us for days. Curious about Buttercup, but too smart to come close. He's beautiful, Ellie breathed. Could someone catch him? Could and should are different questions. Jake's voice carried hard-won wisdom. Some things are meant to be free, little one. Try to cage him, and you kill what made him special in the first place. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither fully acknowledged. Meanwhile, Margaret found herself watching the carpenter more than she cared to admit. From her study window, she could see him working, transforming their failing fences into sturdy barriers against the coming winter. He worked with a methodical precision that spoke of pride and craft, never cutting corners even when he thought no one was watching. More disturbing were the moments when their paths crossed. He always touched his hat respectfully, always kept proper distance. Yet something in his eyes unsettled her carefully ordered world. It was as if he saw through her widow's weeds to the woman beneath, the one she'd buried with Charles. The north fence is complete, ma'am, Jake reported one afternoon, standing in her study doorway. Started on the eastern boundary yesterday. Found some rot in the posts. Probably why you've been losing cattle that direction. I hadn't realized we were losing cattle. Margaret set down her pen, frustrated by her ignorance of ranch operations. How many? Pete says maybe a dozen head over the summer. Not enough to notice unless you're looking, but enough to hurt come market time. Jake shifted his weight. Might want to consider hiring a proper foreman. Tom Bradley means well, but he's getting on in years. And where would I find such a person? The question came out more vulnerable than intended. Good men are scarce, and my reputation as a difficult employer seems to have spread. A slight smile touched Jake's lips. You're not difficult, ma'am. Just particular. Nothing wrong with having standards. The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. You speak from experience, Mr. Sullivan. Had my share of particular bosses. He paused. Truth is, most men don't like working for a woman who knows her own mind. Makes them feel small. But the right man would see it different. See strength instead of stubbornness. Their eyes met and held for a moment before Margaret looked away, disturbed by the flutter in her chest. She was a widow, a mother, not some silly girl to be affected by a handsome face and kind words. Thank you for the fence work, Mr. Sullivan. Martha has your payment ready. It was a dismissal, and they both knew it. But as Jake turned to leave, he paused. There's a horse auction next month in Billings. Might be worth attending if you're thinking of improving your stock. I could advise, if you'd like. The offer hung in the air. Margaret knew she should refuse. Attending an auction with an unmarried man would set tongues wagging. But the ranch needed good horses, and she needed knowledgeable advice. I'll consider it, she said finally. After he left, Margaret stood at the window watching him walk back to the fence line. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not cocky, strong but not brutish. So different from Clarence Worthington's soft pomposity, or the other men who'd come calling since Charles's death. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mama Ellie peered around the door. Could I ask you something? Of course, dear. Margaret returned to her desk, grateful for the distraction. Ellie approached slowly, unusually hesitant. Did you love Papa when you first met him? The question surprised Margaret. What brings this on? I was wondering how you know. When someone's right for you. Margaret studied her daughter's earnest face. Why do you ask? You're far too young to be thinking of such things. I know. I just wonder sometimes. Ellie traced patterns on the desk. Was it like the stories? Love at first sight? No, Margaret answered honestly. Your father and I were an arrangement at first. Our families thought we'd suit. Love came later, slowly, like spring after winter. She touched Ellie's cheek. Real love isn't like stories, Eleanor. It's quieter. stronger. It's choosing someone every day, even when it's hard. But how do you know who to choose? Margaret thought of Charles, steady, reliable Charles, who'd given her security, if not passion. Then, unbidden, came the image of blue eyes that saw too much. You'll know when you're older, she said, the standard maternal deflection. But Ellie wasn't satisfied. What if someone makes you feel like you could fly? Is that love? An odd question from an 8-year-old. Margaret frowned. Eleanor, has someone been speaking to you inappropriately? One of the stable hands. No. Ellie's denial came quick and fierce. I just meant, never mind. But as her daughter scurried away, Margaret felt unease creep up her spine. Something was happening in her household. Something just beyond her perception. Change was coming like a storm across the prairie. And she wasn't sure their carefully built walls would hold. The storm arrived in the form of Clarence Worthington on a cold November morning. He came with papers and promises. His buggy followed by two men who looked more like enforcers than assistants. Margaret received him in the front parlor, her spine steel straight, despite the dread pooling in her stomach. I've been more than patient, Margaret, he began without preamble. But winter's coming, and decisions must be made. He spread documents across the tea table. Sign here, and your debts disappear. You'll have a comfortable home in town, a generous allowance, and Eleanor will have the finest education money can buy. Margaret scanned the papers, her heart sinking with each line. This gives you everything. The ranch, the timber rights, even the water access. A formality. As your husband, it would all be mine anyway. His smile was predatory. Come now, my dear, you can't manage this place alone. The hands talk, creditors circle, and that carpenter you've hired. His eyes glinted. Jake Sullivan has quite a reputation in Texas. Not the sort of man a respectable widow should employ. What do you mean? Oh, nothing proven. But whispers. Follow him, a dead partner, missing cattle, a hasty departure. I'd hate for such associations to taint your reputation further. He leaned forward. Marry me, Margaret. It's the practical solution. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Ellie stood there, eyes blazing. We don't need you, she shouted. We don't need any man. Tell him, Mama, Eleanor, apologize at once. But Ellie was beyond propriety. He's lying. Mr. Jake would never steal cattle. He's teaching me to. She caught herself, but too late. Worthington's eyebrows rose. Teaching you what, young lady? Nothing, Ellie mumbled. But her mother's face had gone pale. Eleanor, go to your room. Now, the command brooked no argument. As Ellie fled, Margaret turned back to Worthington, whose smile had widened. So the carpenter has been spending time with your daughter. How interesting. I wonder what the good people of Willow Creek would think of that arrangement. It was a threat, thinly veiled. Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. Mr. Worthington, I need time to consider. 1 week. He stood, gathering his papers. After that, I'll be forced to call in your loans. All of them, at once. He paused. At the door. Oh, and Margaret. You might want to keep a closer eye on your daughter. And your hired help. After he left, Margaret sat frozen, the weight of their situation crushing her. The debts were real. Charles had hidden them well, but his death revealed the truth. Without Worthington's money or a miracle, they'd lose everything by spring. A tentative knock interrupted her despair. Ma'am. Jake stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Forgive the intrusion, but I saw Worthington leaving. Looked mighty pleased with himself. Mr. Sullivan. She couldn't meet his eyes. I need to speak with you about Eleanor. His expression tightened. She told you. Told me what? Her voice was dangerous. That she's been riding. That you've been teaching her behind my back. It wasn't like that then. Tell me what it was like. She stood, fury replacing despair. Tell me why I shouldn't dismiss you immediately for corrupting my daughter with your rough ways and dangerous ideas. Jake's jaw clenched. Corrupting. I taught her to ride, ma'am. To be strong and capable. If that's corruption, she's 8 years old and braver than most men. She's got a gift, Mrs. Whitmore. A real gift. You're so busy trying to turn her into something she's not, that you can't see who she really is. The words hung between them like a challenge. Margaret felt tears threaten. Tears of rage, frustration, and something else she couldn't name. You don't understand, she said quietly. This world doesn't reward brave women, Mr. Sullivan. It crushes them. I'm trying to protect her, by breaking her spirit. His voice gentled. Ma'am, I know something about cages. Built plenty of them. Fences to keep things in, walls to keep things out. But the worst cages are the ones we build for ourselves. He stepped closer, and Margaret caught his scent. Leather and wood smoke, and something essentially male. Your daughter's like a wild mustang. You can break her, make her docile and proper, but then she won't be Ellie anymore. And what would you have me do? The question came out raw. Let her run wild. Let her throw away every opportunity for a respectable life. Respectable like Worthington. Jake's eyes flashed. That snake would drain this place dry and crush both your spirits in the bargain. That what you want for her? What choice do I have? The words escaped before she could stop them. The debts, the ranch, we'll lose everything. Jake went very still. How much? What? The debts. How much? She named the figure, watched his face carefully. But instead of shock, she saw a calculation. I might know a way, he said slowly. But it would mean trusting me. And it would mean letting Ellie be who she's meant to be. Before Margaret could respond, they heard it, thunder of hooves, a child's scream. They ran outside to see Ellie clinging to a galloping horse. Not Buttercup, but the half-wild gelding from the back pasture. She'd snuck out while they argued, tried to prove herself. Now she was heading straight for the ravine, and there was no time for anything but prayer and desperate hope. Time slowed as Jake sprinted toward the barn. Without breaking stride, he vaulted onto the bare back of his own horse, Thunder, and gave chase. Margaret stood frozen, hand pressed to her mouth, watching her daughter's small form bouncing on the galloping gelding. The ravine loomed ahead, a 30-foot drop onto jagged rocks. Hold on, Ellie. Jake's voice carried over the pounding hooves. Pull back, gentle-like. Don't jerk. But the gelding had the bit in his teeth, running blind with panic. Jake urged, Thunder faster. The big stallion's powerful legs eating up the distance. 20 yards from the edge, he drew alongside. Without hesitation, he leaned out, wrapped one arm around Ellie's waist, and pulled her against him. The gelding veered at the last second, following the ravine's edge before disappearing into the cottonwoods. Jake brought Thunder to a sliding stop. Ellie clutched tight against his chest. She was shaking, her face buried in his shirt, small fingers twisted in the fabric. I got you, he murmured, stroking her tangled hair. You're safe now, little one. I got you. Margaret ran to them, her carefully pinned hair coming loose, her dignity forgotten. Eleanor. Oh God, Eleanor. Jake dismounted carefully, still holding Ellie, and passed her to her mother. Margaret crushed her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. You could have been killed. What were you thinking? I'm sorry, Mama, Ellie sobbed. I just wanted to show you I could do it. I wanted to prove I was brave enough. Brave. Margaret's voice cracked. You call that brave? That was foolish. And Margaret? Jake's quiet voice stopped her. She's scared enough. Save the scolding for later. Their eyes met over Ellie's head. In that moment, something shifted. Margaret saw not just the hired carpenter, but the man who'd risked his life without hesitation to save her daughter. And Jake saw not the rigid widow, but a terrified mother whose world had nearly shattered. Thank you, she whispered. Jake nodded, then knelt to Ellie's level. What you did was dangerous, not brave. There's a difference. His voice was stern but not unkind. A real rider knows their mount, knows their limits. You tried to ride a horse you didn't understand. That's not courage, it's pride. Ellie's tears came fresh. I just wanted everyone to see I could do it. Do what? Get yourself killed. Jake sighed. Emma thought like that. Always had to prove herself. Take the biggest risk. You know what it got her? He paused. She tried to ride a horse with distemper. Thought she could gentle him with love. He threw her into a fence post. She lived 3 days. The stark words made Ellie flinch. Margaret's hand found Jake's shoulder, squeezing gently. I'm sorry, Ellie whispered. I'll never ride again if you don't want me to. No. Margaret surprised them all. No, that's not the answer either. She looked at Jake. You were right. I've been trying to cage her, but I don't know how to keep her safe without walls. You teach her, Jake said simply. Give her proper lessons, real training. Make her earn the right to ride the difficult horses. Channel that fire instead of trying to douse it. Will you? Margaret's voice was small. Will you keep teaching her? Properly this time, with my knowledge. If that's what you want, it's what she needs. Margaret stood, still holding Ellie's hand. Come to dinner tonight, Mr. Sullivan. We have much to discuss. As they walked back to the house, old Pete emerged from the barn, leading the wayward gelding. The old man's face was grim. Got a visitor, Mrs. Whitmore. Worthington's back, and he brought the sheriff. Sure enough, Worthington's buggy sat in the drive again. Sheriff Coleman stood beside it, looking uncomfortable. Margaret, Worthington, oiled forward. I heard there was an incident. Your daughter, riding astride like a common ranch hand, nearly killed. And this man, he pointed at Jake, encouraging such dangerous behavior. Sheriff, I insist you investigate. Now, hold on, Clarence, the sheriff began, but Worthington cut him off. This man has a history, Sheriff. Check the Texas warrants. Jake Sullivan, wanted for questioning in the death of one William McCready, and the disappearance of 300 head of cattle. Jake went still. Margaret felt Ellie's hand tighten in hers. That true, son? Sheriff Coleman asked. You Jake Sullivan from Texas? I am. Jake's voice was steady. And yes, Bill McCready's dead. But not by my hand. He fled Texas rather, than face justice, Worthington pressed. And now he's corrupting innocent children. Sheriff, surely Bill McCready was my partner, Jake interrupted. And my friend, he died, saving my life from rustlers, who were stealing our herd. I killed 2 of them in the fight. The third got away. He looked at the sheriff. I left Texas because McCready's widow blamed me for his death. Said I should have died instead. Maybe she was right. Convenient story, Worthington sneered. With no witnesses. There's one witness. Jake's jaw tightened. The rustler who escaped, Hank Bowman. Last I heard, he was heading north. He paused. Fancy clothes, now, goes by a different name. Henry Worthington. Your cousin, I believe. Worthington's face went white, then red. How dare you? Saw him in town last week. Recognized the scar on his hand where I put it. Jake's smile was dangerous. Want to show the sheriff your cousin's hand, Worthington? The silence stretched taut. Sheriff Coleman looked between the men, understanding dawning. Clarence, where is your cousin Henry these days? He's traveling. On business. Worthington's voice had lost its oil. Interesting. The sheriff touched his hat to Margaret. Ma'am, sorry for the disturbance. I'll need to look into this matter further. He gave Worthington a hard look. All of it. As Worthington's buggy retreated in a cloud of dust, Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew was changing about Jake, about Worthington, about herself. Mama Ellie tugged her hand. Does this mean Mr. Jake can stay? Margaret looked at the man who'd saved her daughter, who'd been willing to face arrest rather than let Worthington's lies stand. Yes, she said softly. He can stay. That evening, Jake arrived for dinner transformed. Gone were the work clothes and sawdust. He wore a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair neatly trimmed. Ellie barely recognized him. You look different, she announced with a child's directness. Like a proper gentleman. Appearances can deceive, little one. But he smiled, taking the chair Margaret indicated. The meal began awkwardly. Martha had prepared her best roast, and the dining room glowed with candlelight. But conversation stuttered and stalled. Finally, Margaret set down her fork. Tell us about Texas, she said. The truth this time. Jake was quiet for a moment. Not much to tell. Bill McCready and I started with nothing. 100 head of scrawny longhorns and more debt than sense. But we worked hard, built it up to a real spread. Then the Carson gang started hitting ranches along the border. He absently rubbed a scar on his hand. We fought back. Lost. Bill died getting me to safety after I took 2 bullets. His wife, Mary, she never forgave me for living when he didn't. Can't say I blame her. Is that why you came here? Ellie asked, running from sad memories. Eleanor, Margaret warned, but Jake shook his head. It's a fair question. Yeah, partly. But mostly, I came looking for something. What? Same thing your daddy was looking for, I reckon. Place where a man could be more than his past. He met Margaret's eyes. Where someone could build something worth keeping. The candles flickered between them. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away. Speaking of building, she said too quickly, I need advice about the ranch. The financial situation is difficult. Jake leaned back. How bad? She told him everything. Charles's hidden debts, the failing cattle operation, Worthington's threats. With each word, she felt the weight on her shoulders grow heavier. There might be a way, Jake said, when she finished. That mustang herd Ellie's been watching. There's a government contract for cavalry remounts. Good money for good horses. If we could capture and gentle them, we. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I'm a carpenter, Mr. Sullivan, not a rancher. You're a smart woman with good land and water rights. I know horses and cattle. Pete knows the local terrain better than anyone. He glanced at Ellie. And you've got a daughter who'd work harder than any hand to make it succeed. It's too risky, Margaret protested. If we fail, you'll lose the ranch anyway. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. At least this way, you fight for it. Ellie's eyes shone. Please, Mama. We could do it. I know we could. Margaret looked between them, her daughter's eager face, Jake's steady confidence. When had she become so afraid of taking chances? Charles would have calculated odds, consulted bankers, worried about appearances. But Charles was gone, and conventional wisdom had led them to the brink of ruin. All right, she heard herself say, but we do this properly. You'll move into the foreman's cottage, take meals with the hands. I won't have gossip. Jake nodded, and Ellie's lessons. Continue. But supervised, structured. If she's going to help with the horses, she needs proper training. She turned to her daughter. This isn't a game, Eleanor. You'll work hard, follow instructions, and no more foolish risks. Understood? Yes, Mama. Ellie practically bounced in her seat. When do we start? Tomorrow, Jake said. Mustangs are moving closer to water as the weather turns. We'll need to scout locations, plan the roundup. He stood. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Whitmore. And for the trust. After he left, Margaret sat by the dying fire, while Ellie chattered excitedly about horses and plans. Trust. Such a simple word, for such a complicated thing. She'd trusted Charles, and he'd hidden debts that now threatened to destroy them. She'd trusted respectability, and it had nearly cost her daughter's spirit. Now she was trusting a man with secrets, a plan that could fail, and feelings she didn't want to name. But as she watched Ellie's animated face, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced since Charles died. Hope. Outside, early snow began to fall, dusting the ranch in white. From his new quarters, Jake watched the big house and made his own plans. The Mustangs weren't the only wild things that needed Margaret Whitmore had built walls higher than any fence, and breaking them down would take more than words. But he'd seen her fire today, when she'd run to Ellie, when she'd stood up to Worthington, when she'd chosen hope over fear. That fire was worth fighting for. In town, Clarence Worthington paced his study, telegram crumpled in his fist. His cousin Henry had vanished, spooked by Jake's recognition. Without Henry's testimony about the rustling, Worthington's leverage was gone. But he hadn't built his fortune by accepting defeat. If he couldn't force Margaret to marry him, he'd find other ways to take what he wanted. The banker smiled coldly. Winter was coming, and with it, opportunities for desperate people to make fatal mistakes. He would wait, watch, and when the Whitmores were at their weakest, he would strike. The first snowflakes settled on Willow Creek, covering the landscape in deceptive peace. But beneath the white blanket, the earth was preparing for spring, and for the battles yet to come. December arrived with bitter winds and heavy snow, transforming the ranch into a crystalline wilderness. The Mustang roundup had been planned for early spring, but winter brought its own challenges. Cattle needed feeding, fences needed clearing, and the dwindling bank account needed attention. Margaret stood in the barn, watching Jake and Pete organize the hay distribution. In 2 months, Jake had transformed their operation. The hands worked harder, stayed longer, showed a loyalty she'd never managed to inspire. Even Thomas Bradley, initially resentful of being superseded, now deferred to Jake's judgment. Mrs. Whitmore. Jake approached, snow dusting his shoulders. Got a problem? The Anderson Ranch lost 30 head in last night's storm. They're offering good money for extra hay, but we'd be cutting it close for our own stock. It was the kind of decision Charles would have agonized over, but Margaret was learning to trust her instincts. How much are they offering? Jake named a figure that would cover 2 months of expenses. Sell them half what they need, she decided. Enough to help, not enough to endanger our herd. And Jake, make sure they know we're doing them a favor. We might need one returned. His smile was approving. You're thinking like a rancher. I'm thinking like a survivor. But she smiled back, warmth spreading through her chest. These moments were becoming dangerous. The casual intimacy, the shared glances, the way her breath caught when he stood too close. Mama. Ellie burst through the barn doors, snow-covered and glowing. Jake taught me to read weather in the horse's behavior. Storms breaking by tonight. At 10 years old, her birthday had passed in November, Ellie was transforming. The sullen, restricted child had become confident, capable. She could saddle any horse in the stable, predict weather changes, and ride better than most adults. Margaret watched her daughter demonstrate her new knowledge, gesturing animatedly as Jake nodded encouragement. When had Ellie started calling him just Jake, instead of Mr. Jake? When had their little family of 2 expanded to include this quiet man, who fit so naturally into their lives. Margaret, she turned to find Doc Morrison in the doorway, medical bag in hand, her heart seized. What's wrong? Who's hurt? No one. Yet his face was grim. Wanted to warn you. Spotted fever's hit the Johnson place. 2 children down already. It's spreading fast. Spotted fever. The word sent ice through her veins. It had taken Charles in 3 days, despite all Doc Morrison's efforts. What should we do? Keep your people close. No trips to town unless necessary. First sign of fever, send for me immediate. He paused. Might want to stock up on supplies while you can. If this spreads, Willow Creek could be quarantined. After he left, Margaret found herself shaking. Jake appeared at her elbow, steady and calm. We'll be fine, he said quietly. I'll ride to town today. Stock up on everything we might need. Pete can handle the ranch for 1 day. I should go too. I know what we need. No, his voice was firm. You and Ellie stay here. Less exposure, less risk. For once, she didn't argue. The thought of Ellie exposed to spotted fever made her physically ill. Make a list, Jake continued. Everything you can think of. Medicine, food, supplies. I'll mortgage my saddle if needed. I have money. She went to the house, returning with a small leather pouch. Charles kept this hidden. Emergency funds. Jake weighed the pouch, whistled low. This is more than emergency funds. It's all we have left. She met his eyes. Spend what's needed. We can't afford to be caught short. He nodded, understanding the trust she was placing in him. As he prepared to leave, Ellie ran up. Can I go, please? I promise, I'll be good. Not this time, little one. Jake ruffled her hair. Need you here to help your mama and Pete. You're the best rider we got. If something happens while I'm gone, they'll need you. Ellie straightened with pride at the responsibility. Margaret felt a rush of gratitude for how he handled her daughter, never dismissing her, always making her feel valued. The day dragged endlessly. Margaret tried to focus on ledges, but found herself watching the road. Ellie attempted lessons, but kept wandering to the window. Even Pete seemed anxious, checking the horizon repeatedly. Finally, as dusk painted the sky purple, Jake returned. His wagon was loaded with supplies, and he brought news that chilled them further. It's bad, he reported over dinner. 10 families affected now. Doc Morrison's overwhelmed. And Margaret? He hesitated. Worthington's been buying up mortgages from sick families, offering to help in exchange for land rights. That vulture, Pete spat. Man's got no shame. He's got a plan, Jake corrected. With enough land, he'll control water rights for the whole valley. Force everyone to sell or dry up. Margaret felt sick. While they fought to save their ranch. Honestly, Worthington profited from misery. What do? We survive, Jake said simply. Keep our people healthy, our stock fed, and come spring, we round up those mustangs, beat him fair and square. That night, Margaret found herself at Ellie's bedside, watching her daughter sleep. The lamplight caught the red in her hair. Charles's hair, but the determined set of her jaw, even in sleep, was purely Eleanor. Can't sleep. Jake's voice from the doorway made her jump, checking for fever. She smoothed Ellie's blanket unnecessarily. I can't lose her, Jake. She's all I have left. Of her voice broke. Jake crossed the room. His presence solid and comforting. You won't lose her. She's strong, like her mama. Without thinking, Margaret leaned into him, just for a moment. His arms came around her, and she breathed in his scent. Leather and pine and safety. I'm scared, she admitted. Words muffled against his chest. I know. His hand stroked her back gently. But we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore, Margaret. January brought the fever to their door, despite all precautions. Not Ellie, thank God. But 3 of the ranch hands fell ill in quick succession. Margaret transformed the bunkhouse into a makeshift hospital, nursing the men with fierce determination, while Jake kept the ranch running. On the 4th night, as she changed bandages by lamplight, Jake found her swaying on her feet. When did you last sleep? He demanded, steadying her with gentle hands. I can't leave them. You can, and you will. He guided her firmly to a chair. Can't help anyone if you collapse. I'll take this watch. She was too exhausted to argue. As he worked, competent and careful with the sick men, Margaret watched through heavy eyes. This man who could break horses and fight rustlers, moved among the fevered cowboys with surprising tenderness. You've done this before, she observed. Trail drives. He wrung out a cooling cloth. Fever, injuries, snakebite. You learned to tend your own out there. He glanced at her. You should go to bed. In a moment. But she didn't move, oddly, reluctant to leave this quiet intimacy. Jake, why did you really stay? After Worthington's threats, the sheriff's questions. You could have moved on. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, first time I saw you, you were standing in that parlor like a queen in a castle, all proper and distant and locked away. He smiled slightly. Then I saw you run to Ellie that day. She almost went over the ravine, hair flying, dignity forgotten, just a mama terrified for her baby. That's when I knew. Knew what? That underneath all that propriety was a woman worth knowing, worth staying for. Their eyes met across the lamplit space. Margaret felt her heart pound, her carefully maintained walls crumbling. Jake, riders coming. Pete's shout shattered the moment. 6, maybe 7. Jake was instantly alert, hand moving to his gun. Stay with the sick men, he ordered Margaret, already heading for the door. Through the window, she watched torches approaching through the snow. Her blood chilled as she recognized Worthington's carriage among the riders. Jake met them in the yard, Pete and 2 healthy hands flanking him. Ellie appeared at Margaret's elbow, trembling with excitement and fear. Is it rustlers, Mama? Worse, Margaret muttered, recognizing Sheriff Coleman among the riders. It's the law. She couldn't hear the words exchanged, but saw Jake's stance shift to defensive. Worthington was gesturing dramatically, papers in hand. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, but resolute. Unable to stand it, Margaret threw on her cloak and marched outside, Ellie close behind, despite orders to stay. Outstanding warrant from Texas, Worthington was saying smugly. Cattle theft and suspicion of murder. Sheriff, do your duty. Now hold on, Sheriff Coleman protested. This warrant's 2 years old, and there's questions about its validity. The law is the law, Worthington insisted. Or does Mrs. Whitmore's influence extend to corrupting justice itself? Margaret stepped forward. What's the meaning of this? Justice, my dear. Worthington's smile was triumphant. Your hired gun is wanted in Texas. I've done my civic duty reporting it. He leaned forward. Of course, if you were under my protection as my wife, I could perhaps convince the authorities to overlook never. The word came from Ellie, fierce and clear. We'll never let you near Mama, you snake. Eleanor, Margaret gasped, but Jake laughed. Girls, got your number, Worthington. He turned to the sheriff. I'll come peacefully, Coleman. But I want your word you'll investigate this warrant proper, and that my friends here will be safe while I'm gone. Jake, no. Ellie broke free from Margaret, flinging herself at him. You can't leave. Tell them about McCready, about the rustlers. Hush, little one. Jake knelt, holding her close. Sometimes we gotta face things head on. You take care of your mama and the ranch. I'll be back. Promise. Her voice was small, broken. Promise. He looked over her head at Margaret. Both of you. Wait for me. As the sheriff led Jake away, Worthington lingered. This changes things, Margaret. Without your foreman, with men sick, winter deepening, how long before you're begging for my help? Get off my land. Her voice was ice. Before I forget, I'm a lady and shoot you myself. His face darkened. You'll regret this. When your daughter's starving, when the bank forecloses. The only thing I regret, Margaret interrupted, is ever being polite to you. Get out. After they left, Margaret stood in the snowy yard, Ellie sobbing against her. The ranch suddenly felt impossibly large, impossibly vulnerable, but as she looked at the men watching from windows and doorways, sick men Jake had tended, healthy men he'd led, she saw determination matching her own. Pete, she called. Gather everyone who can work. We have a ranch to run. Yes, ma'am. The old man straightened. What about Jake? Jake will handle Jake. She lifted her chin. We'll handle everything else. And when he comes back, not if, when he'll find this place thriving. But Mama, Ellie whispered, what if they don't let him come back? Margaret knelt, gripping her daughter's shoulders. Then we'll go get him ourselves. We're women, Eleanor. We don't wait for rescue, we ride to battle. The fire in Ellie's eyes reignited, like cowboys. Like cowboys, Margaret agreed. Now dry your tears, we have work to do. As dawn broke, cold and clear, mother and daughter stood side by side, facing whatever came next. The wild horses still ran free in the distant hills. Come spring, with or without Jake Sullivan, they would run them down. It was a promise Margaret made to the morning sky and to her heart, which had finally admitted what Jake had known all along. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth waiting for. February tested every ounce of Margaret's newfound strength. Without Jake, the ranch struggled. 2 more hands quit, spooked by fever and lured by Worthington's promises of easier work. The remaining men worked themselves ragged, but there weren't enough hours in the day. Margaret learned to drive cattle through blizzards, repair fence in freezing wind, and calculate feed ratios by lamplight. Her soft hands grew calloused. Her proper dresses gave way to practical wool. And somewhere along the way, she stopped caring what anyone thought. Ellie transformed to 10. She rode the ranch like a seasoned hand, checking cattle, running messages, even helping Pete break ice on water troughs. The coddled child who'd played piano had become a fierce little warrior. 3 weeks into Jake's absence, a letter arrived. Ellie found Margaret in the barn and read it aloud, voice trembling. Margaret, trial delayed. Texas judge coming next month. Sheriff Coleman believes truth will out, but Worthington's got deep pockets and longer reach. Don't let him win. Take care of our girl. Jay, our girl, Ellie whispered. He called me our girl. Margaret's eyes burned, but she had no tears left. Pete, she called. Saddle the horses. We're going to town, ma'am. The old man looked worried. Storm's building, then we'd better hurry. She'd made a decision. If Worthington wanted to play dirty, she'd show him how a desperate woman fought. In town, Margaret marched into the bank, Ellie at her side. The clerk tried to stop her, but she swept past him into Samuel Morrison's office. The bank president looked up, surprised. Margaret, what, I need a loan. She placed Charles's emergency fund pouch on his desk. This as collateral. Enough to get through spring and pay for the Mustang roundup. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Margaret, you know I'd like to help, but Worthington holds your notes now. He'd have to approve. Then get him. Morrison sent for Worthington, who arrived within minutes, clearly expecting this moment. His smile was insufferably smug. Margaret, how lovely. Ready to be reasonable. I'm ready to do business. She kept her voice steady. Approve the loan, and I'll sign a contract giving you first option to buy if we default. Fair market value, assessed by 3 independent parties. His eyes narrowed. Why would I do that when I can have it all for nothing when you fail? Because you're a businessman, Margaret said. And I'm offering you a guarantee. Either we succeed and pay you back with interest, or you get the ranch at a fair price, without the meances of foreclosure. She leaned forward. Unless you prefer everyone knowing you profited from fever and misery. Bad for business. Especially if certain rumors about your cousin reached Austin. It was a bluff. She had no way to spread such rumors. But Worthington didn't know that. His face darkened, then smoothed into false pleasantness. Very well, Morrison. Draw up the papers. 6 months, 15% interest. 10%, Margaret countered. 12. Final offer. They shook on it, his hand clammy in hers. As they left the bank, Ellie whispered, Did we win? We bought time, Margaret corrected. Now we make it count. March arrived with fall spring warm days that melted snow and revealed the Mustang trails. Pete had been scouting all winter, marking locations and patterns. The wild horses had wintered in a box canyon 20 miles north, protected but accessible. We'll need more men, Pete reported over dinner. Can't run Mustangs with a skeleton crew. I know. Margaret had been dreading this. Money was tight even with the loan. Then Ellie spoke up. What about the other ranches? The ones Worthington hasn't bought yet. Margaret frowned. What about them? They need the Mustangs gone, as much as we need to catch them. Horses are eating grass meant for cattle. Ellie's eyes shone with excitement. We could share. They help with the roundup. They'd get pick of the horses for their own remounts. That's... Margaret stared at her daughter. That's brilliant. Within a week, she'd organized a coalition. 5 neighboring ranches agreed to contribute men and resources in exchange for horses. Even Martha Anderson, whose husband had died of fever, sent her 2 oldest sons. Worthington won't like this, she told Margaret. Good, Margaret replied. They set the roundup for early April, when the horses would be moving to spring pastures. Everything depended on this working. As March waned, Margaret stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. Tomorrow, riders would begin arriving. In 2 days, they'd attempt something that seasoned cowboys considered risky with a full crew. We can do this, Mama. Ellie joined her, standing tall for her 10 years. Jake taught me to read the horses. Pete knows the land. You know how to lead. We can do this. Margaret pulled her daughter close. When did you get so wise? When you stopped trying to make me be someone else. The simple truth of it pierced Margaret's heart. All those years trying to force Ellie into a mold. when her daughter's wild spirit was her greatest strength. I love you, Eleanor Whitmore, exactly as you are. I love you too, Mama. And when we catch those horses and save the ranch, we'll go get Jake back. Like you said, Whitmore women ride to battle. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Margaret sent up a prayer. For strength, for luck, for the man in a Texas jail who'd taught them both to be brave. Tomorrow would begin their greatest challenge, but tonight, she had her daughter, her determination, and a ranch full of people ready to fight beside her. It would have to be enough. April dawned clear and cold, perfect for running horses. 30 riders gathered at the Whitmore ranch. Men and women from across the valley united against common threats, wild horses and Worthington's greed. Margaret stood before them, wearing Charles's old riding clothes altered to fit. You all know why we're here, she began. These mustangs have been eating our grass, spooking our cattle. But corralled and gentled, they're worth good money. Government, contracts, private sales, breeding stock. She paused. More important, this roundup proves we don't need Clarence Worthington or anyone else to survive. We take care of our own. A cheer went up. Pete outlined the plan. Riders would funnel the horses toward the box canyon, where they'd constructed a clever gate system. Ellie would ride scout, using her small size and knowledge of the horses to guide the operation. I should be with the main drive, Ellie protested. I'm the best rider, which is why you're scout, Margaret said firmly. This isn't about glory, it's about success. For 2 days, they maneuvered carefully, slowly tightening the circle around the Mustang herd. The horses, led by a magnificent black stallion, seemed to sense the trap. Twice they nearly broke free, but the riders held. On the third morning, everything went wrong. Worthington appeared with 20 men, blocking the canyon entrance. This is private land, he announced. My land, purchased yesterday from the territorial government. Margaret's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. Show me the papers. He produced them with a flourish. Legal, official, and dated. He'd known their plan all along. However, Worthington continued, I'm willing to be reasonable. Sign over your ranch, Margaret, and I'll let these good people complete their roundup. Otherwise, he smiled coldly. My men will scatter these horses to the 4 winds. The coalition riders muttered angrily. Some had mortgaged equipment for this chance. All had risked precious time and resources. Mama, no, Ellie whispered. But Margaret was thinking Worthington might own the canyon. But the horses were still free game on open range. Counteroffer, she called. Single combat. Your best rider against mine. Winner takes all. The horses, the canyon rights, and my ranch free and clear. Worthington laughed. Against who? You. Against me, Ellie said, stepping forward. The gathered riders gasped. Worthington's amusement deepened. A child. You must be desperate. Scared. Ellie taunted. Your best against a 10-year-old girl. His face darkened. Fine, Jennings. A lean cowboy separated from Worthington's group, raced to the canyon and back. First to touch the gate, wins. As the riders lined up, Margaret gripped Ellie's hand. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Ellie's jaw set with determination. Jake taught me everything. Trust me, Mama. The race began with a shot. Jennings took the early lead on his larger horse, but Ellie rode low and light, becoming one with Buttercup. At the canyon turn, she cut inside, saving precious yards. The return sprint was brutal. Jennings used his quirt liberally, while Ellie whispered encouragement to Buttercup. 50 yards from the finish, they were dead even. Then Ellie did something unexpected. She gave Buttercup her head completely, trusting the mare's heart over her own control. The horse, feeling that trust, found reserves no one knew she had. They crossed the line a full length ahead. The coalition erupted in cheers. Worthington's face was purple with rage, but his own men had witnessed the fair victory. The contract, Margaret said coolly. Witnessed and signed. Your canyon rights for my ranch's freedom. As Worthington signed with shaking hands, dust rose on the horizon. A lone rider approached at full gallop. Margaret's heart stopped as she recognized the silhouette. Jake Sullivan rode straight to them, looking gaunt but grinning. Sorry, I'm late. Texas judge threw out the charges when 3 witnesses confirmed Hank Bowman was really Henry Worthington. He swung down from thunder. Seems someone sent telegrams to every lawman in Texas about the connection. Wonder who? Margaret looked at her daughter, who was trying unsuccessfully to look innocent. Eleanor Whitmore, what did you do? I wrote. Letters, Ellie admitted. Lots of letters. Pete helped me send them. If Worthington could use the law against us, Why couldn't we use it against him? Jake laughed, catching Ellie up in a hug. That's my girl. Clever as her mama. He set her down, turned to Margaret. Speaking of your mama. Before Margaret could react, Jake kissed her. Right there, in front of God and everyone. When they broke apart, she was breathless. Jake Sullivan. That was highly improper. Woman. I just spent 2 months in jail thinking about you. Proper can wait. He grinned. Besides, I figure if I'm gonna help run this ranch, I should make an honest woman of you. Is that a proposal? It's a promise. He kissed her again, shorter, but no less sweet. Marry me, Margaret. Let me be Ellie's father and your partner. Let's build something worth keeping. Say yes, Mama. Ellie bounced between them. Say yes. Margaret looked at her daughter's shining face, at the man who'd taught them both to be brave, at the coalition of neighbors who'd become friends. Yes, she said simply. The roundup resumed with new energy. By sunset, they'd corralled 60 mustangs, including the black stallion. The government contract would clear their debts with money to spare. Other ranchers took their shares, each success weakening Worthington's stranglehold on the valley. As stars emerged, the Whitmore ranch rang with celebration. Musicians appeared, whiskey flowed, and impromptu dancing broke out. Margaret found herself waltzing with Jake, while Ellie demonstrated riding tricks for admiring cowboys. No regrets? Jake asked, holding her close. Only one, Margaret admitted. I wish I'd been brave enough to see you sooner. You saw me when it mattered. He spun her around. Besides, good things are worth waiting for. Worthington left the valley that night, his empire crumbling. Within a year, he'd disappear entirely. Some said to Mexico, others to prison. Margaret didn't care. She had everything she needed. 5 years later, Ellie would win her first professional rodeo at 15. Becoming the youngest champion in Montana history. She'd go on to fame across the West, always returning to the ranch where a widow and a carpenter had taught her to chase dreams. But that night, as music drifted across the prairie and wild horses called from the hills, the future was unwritten. All that mattered was this moment. A mother, a daughter, and the man who'd helped them both fly free. The Whitmore ranch had survived. More than that, it had become home.